The morning sun painted the hills around New Geneva Colony in golden light. Children's laughter echoed across the peaceful valley as they ran through the gardens of Stella Mari's orphanage. The massive building sat like a gentle giant among the rolling fields, its white walls and blue roof, a cheerful sight against the green landscape. Sister walked slowly through the main hall, her soft footsteps mixing with the sounds of children at play. At 53, she had spent the last 20 years caring for orphaned children on this frontier world. Her gray hair was tied back in a simple bun, and her kind eyes held the warmth that had comforted thousands of scared children over the years. Sister called out Tommy, a 7-year-old boy with bright red hair and freckles covering his face. He ran up to her with a drawing in his small hands. "Look what I made." Knelt down to his level and studied the colorful picture. It showed stick figures of children playing under a big yellow sun. In the center was a tall figure in a white dress, clearly meant to be her. "This is beautiful, Tommy," she said, ruffling his hair. "Should we hang it on the wall with the others?" Tommy nodded eagerly and ran off to show his friends. Stood up and looked around the hall. 847 children called this place home. They came from all over, human space kids whose parents had died in mining accidents, disease outbreaks, or the many dangers of life on frontier worlds. The orphanage was more than just a place to sleep and eat. It had classrooms where children learned about science, history, and art. There were workshops where older kids learned useful skills like farming and machine repair. The medical wing had the best doctors on the planet. Most importantly, it had people who cared. Walked toward the communications room where her assistant, Maria Santos, was reading the morning reports. Maria was a former colony security officer who had joined the orphanage staff after her own daughter was killed in a transport accident. She handled the orphanage's outside communications and security. "Anything important today?" asked. Maria looked up from her tablet with a worried expression. "There's been some news from the outer colonies. The Empire has been making demands about human settlements in their territory." Frowned. There were a race of tall, lizard-like beings who had built a large empire across this part of the galaxy. They were known for being aggressive and looking down on other species, especially mammals like humans. "What kind of demands?" asked. "They want humans to leave 12 colonies in what they call traditional space. They're giving 72 hours for complete evacuation." Felt a chill run down her spine. 72 hours, that's impossible. These colonies have millions of people. "The human diplomats are trying to negotiate more time," Maria said, "but they don't seem interested in talking." Before could respond, both women heard the deep hum of large ships passing overhead. They hurried outside to see massive gray vessels moving slowly across the sky. The ships were clearly alien in design, with sharp angles and dark metal that seemed to absorb light. Other staff members and children had also come outside to watch. The younger children pointed and asked questions, while the older ones looked worried. Everyone knew that alien warships didn't usually visit peaceful farming colonies. "Sister," called out Dr. James Miller, the orphanage's head physician. He was a tall, thin man who had given up a successful career on Earth to help frontier children. "I'm getting reports that a fleet has taken position in orbit around our planet." Gathered the children around her. "Everyone needs to stay calm," she announced in her clear, steady voice. "These ships are just visiting. We're going to continue with our normal day." But inside, she felt growing fear. New Geneva Colony was home to 50,000 humans. The orphanage held almost 1,000 children. If they were here to enforce their demands, innocent people would suffer. In orbit above the planet, Captain Sarah stood on the bridge of the UHSV Defiance, watching the massive war fleet through her ship's sensors. Her small escort group of 4 ships looked tiny compared to the enemy force. 30 warships hung in space like sleeping predators, each one larger and more powerful than anything in the human fleet. was a veteran of several border conflicts with hostile alien species. She had short black hair, determined eyes, and the steady hands of someone who had faced death many times. Her crew trusted her completely, but she knew they were badly outnumbered. "Captain," reported her communications officer, "we're receiving a message from the flagship." "Put it through," ordered. The main screen flickered to life, showing the face of Ambassador, the diplomat leading this mission. His reptilian features were cold and emotionless, with yellow eyes that seemed to look at humans as insects. When he spoke, his voice was harsh and full of contempt. "Human vessels, you will withdraw from this system immediately. This world is now under authority. Any interference will be considered an act of war." Stepped forward. "Ambassador, this is a peaceful colony with civilian families. We request time to organize proper evacuation procedures." His mouth turned up in what might have been a smile, showing rows of sharp teeth. 72 hours was already generous for primitive mammals. No additional time will be given. Comply or face the consequences. The transmission ended, leaving staring at a blank screen. She turned to her tactical officer. "How long would it take to evacuate the orphanage?" "At least a week, Captain. We'd need transport ships from 3 different systems." Clenched her fists. They were demanding something impossible and using it as an excuse for aggression. She had seen this pattern before with bullying alien empires. Back on the surface, was reading bedtime stories to a group of young children when Maria burst into the room. "Sister, we just received an official evacuation order. 4 hours to get everyone off the planet." Felt the world spinning around her. 4 hours to evacuate nearly 1,000 children. Even with every transport ship on the planet working together, they could maybe save 200 of the youngest ones. She looked down at the children gathered around her feet. Little Sarah, only 3 years old, was already falling asleep against her leg. Age 5 was asking when they would finish the story. None of them understood that their world was about to end. "Gather the senior staff," said quietly. "We need to make some very hard choices." As Maria ran to alert the other caregivers, continued reading the story, her voice never wavering even as tears began to fall down her cheeks. Outside, the alien ships waited like storm clouds, ready to bring thunder and lightning to a peaceful world. The orphanage became a place of controlled chaos as staff members worked desperately to save as many children as possible. Sister stood in the main hall, watching her team organize the impossible task of evacuating 800 children in 4 hours. "The youngest ones first," ordered, her voice steady despite the fear in her heart. "Bobbies and toddlers go on the first transport. Maria, how many ships do we have?" Maria checked her tablet with shaking hands. 3 colony transports and 2 private cargo haulers. Total capacity is maybe 250 people, including crew. Closed her eyes for a moment, doing the terrible math. 250 saved out of 847. The numbers felt like a knife in her chest. Dr. Miller approached with a crying infant in his arms. "Sister, we need to start the medical evacuations too. Some of our sick children can't wait." "Of course," nodded. "Anyone who needs immediate medical care goes with the first group." Throughout the orphanage, staff members were packing emergency bags and comforting frightened children. The older kids helped with the younger ones, many of them understanding that something terrible was happening but not knowing exactly what. 12-year-old Lisa, one of the senior children, approached with tears in her eyes. "Sister, are we all going to be okay?" Knelt down and took Lisa's hands in hers. "I need you to be very brave, Lisa. Some of you will go on the ships to safety. Others will stay here with me. But no matter what happens, remember that you are loved." Lisa nodded seriously, trying to be grown up even though she was terrified. "I'll help with the little ones." In orbit, Captain watched through her ship's sensors as the evacuation began. The few transport ships looked tiny as they moved between the planet and space stations in the system. She knew it wasn't enough, but her hands were tied by the massive enemy fleet surrounding them. "Captain," her tactical officer reported, "they are powering up their weapon systems." Jaw tightened. "Signal the fleet battle positions." Her small group of ships moved into a defensive formation, but everyone on the bridge knew they were 20 to 1. The human ships were fast and well built, but the vessels were simply massive. On the flagship, Ambassador watched the human evacuation with cold amusement. To him, humans were just another inferior mammalian species that needed to learn their place in the galaxy. The fact that they were trying to save their young showed typical mammalian weakness. "Ambassador," reported his tactical officer, "the human evacuation is proceeding slowly. At this rate, most of the population will still be on the planet when the deadline expires." Nodded with satisfaction. "Excellent. That will make our demonstration more effective. Prepare to target the human colony's infrastructure." "Sir, what about their military ships?" "Let them watch," said with a cruel smile. "After we destroy their precious colony, they will spread word of power throughout human space. Fear is more valuable than a quick victory." Back at the orphanage, the first transport ship had been loaded with crying bobbies and toddlers, along with several caregivers to watch them. Stood at the landing pad, saying goodbye to children she had raised for years. Little Tommy, the red-headed boy who had shown her his drawing that morning, clung to her dress. "I don't want to go without you, sister." Picked him up and hugged him tight. "You're going on an adventure, Tommy. The other nice people will take care of you, and maybe someday we'll see each other again." As the transport lifted off, watched it disappear into the sky. 210 children saved. More than 600 still remained. "Sister," Maria called from the communications center, "Captain is trying to reach you." Hurried inside to take the call. Captain's face appeared on the screen, looking grim. "Sister, I need to be honest with you. My ships can't protect you from the fleet. We're going to try to draw them away from the planet, but you can't save us," finished quietly. His voice was filled with regret. "I'm sorry. We'll do everything we can, but you should prepare for the worst." Nodded. "Thank you for trying, Captain. Take care of the children who got away." The transmission ended. Looked around at her remaining staff, 23 brave men and women who could have left on the evacuation ships but chose to stay with the children who couldn't be saved. "Everyone gather in the main hall," announced. "It's time to bring all the children together." As the staff assembled the remaining 637 children, tried to think of words that could comfort them. How do you explain to a child that adults have decided to kill them for reasons they would never understand? In space, the battle began as fleet tried to protect the evacuation ships. The human destroyers were fast and clever, using hit-and-run tactics against the larger vessels. For 30 minutes, it looked like they might actually succeed in disrupting the enemy formation. Then grew tired of the game. "Destroy the human ships," he ordered. The full power of the fleet turned on small force. 2 destroyers were vaporized immediately, their crews dying instantly in balls of superheated plasma. Ship, the Defiance, took heavy damage but managed to limp away from the battle. "Captain," her communications officer reported with a broken voice, "they are beginning their attack on the colony." Watched helplessly as energy beams lanced down from orbit, striking the colony's spaceport and government buildings. The bombardment was precise at first, targeting only military and official structures. But then a human sniper on the surface managed to kill an officer during their landing operation. His response was swift and merciless. "Destroy everything," he ordered. "Eliminate this terrorist threat completely." The bombardment intensified, spreading across the entire colony. Homes, farms, schools, everything was targeted. The peaceful farming community became a hellscape of fire and destruction. At the orphanage, gathered all the children in the reinforced basement that had been built as a shelter against storms. The thick walls shook with each explosion that came closer to their building. "Sister," whispered 8-year-old Maria, a little girl who had lost her parents in a transport accident. "Are we going to die?" Pulled the child close to her. "I don't know, sweetheart, but if we do, we'll be together, and we'll see your parents again." The other children huddled close to their caregivers, some crying, some praying, some too scared to make any sound at all. The explosions were getting closer. Activated her emergency communicator for one final message to the evacuation ships. "This is Sister at Stella Mari's orphanage. We have 637 children and 23 staff members still here. The bombing is very close now. Tell their families that we love them. Tell the authorities what happened here. Tell them we tried to save them all." She looked around at the frightened faces surrounding her. These were good children who had already lost so much in their short lives. Now they would lose everything. "Everyone hold hands," said softly. "Let's pray together." The children and staff joined hands in a large circle as the explosions grew louder. Began reciting the simple prayer she had taught thousands of children over the years. "Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep." The voices of 600 children joined hers, their innocent words rising above the sounds of destruction outside. At the moment the orphanage was hit by the orbital bombardment, they were still praying together. Sister died holding little Maria's hand, her body shielding the child from the falling debris. Around them, 623 children and 23 caregivers were killed in an instant, their only crime being in the wrong place when powerful adults decided to play games of war. The attack was broadcast across human space through automated news drones. The galaxy watched as rescue workers pulled tiny bodies from the smoking ruins, as Sister's melted cross was found clutched in her dead hand, as investigators counted the small shoes scattered among the debris. Humanity saw what had been done to their children, and humanity would never forget. The news reached Earth exactly 72 hours after the orphanage was destroyed. The quantum communication relay carried more than just words. It brought videos, pictures, and the desperate final transmission from Sister. President sat in the Oval Office, watching the footage for the 5th time. Each viewing made her angrier and more heartbroken. On her screen, she could see rescue workers pulling small bodies from the smoking ruins of what had been a place of hope and safety. The president was a tough woman who had led humanity through several difficult challenges. She had served in the military before entering politics, and she understood both war and peace. But as she watched children's toys scattered among the debris of the orphanage, something cold and hard settled in her chest. Her aide, Secretary Williams, entered the room quietly. "Madam President, the emergency session of the United Human Council is ready to convene." Turned off the screen and stood up. "How many council members are present?" "All of them, ma'am. Representatives from every human colony and world. I've never seen anything like it. They dropped everything to be here." The council chamber was packed with the leaders of humanity's far-flung civilization. Colony governors, military commanders, industrial leaders, and scientists filled every seat. The usual political divisions and regional interests seemed to have vanished overnight. President walked to the podium and looked out at the assembled representatives. For a moment, the room was completely silent. "Yesterday, the Empire murdered 623 children," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "They killed these children deliberately after giving their caregivers an impossible deadline to evacuate. They filmed the attack. They celebrated it." Murmurs of anger rippled through the audience. Governor Martinez from the Tau colony stood up. "Madam President, my colonies are prepared to contribute every ship and every soldier to the response. The asteroid mining corporations are already converting their facilities to weapons production. announced director from the Belt Industrial Council. We can have the first new warships ready within 3 months. One by one, the representatives stood to pledge their support. Colony militias, corporate fleets, research facilities, mining operations, all of humanity's scattered civilization was offering to join the fight. President raised her hand for silence. The response will be under the command of Admiral Torres. Admiral, please address the council. Admiral Torres was a legend in human space. He had won the campaign against hostile aliens, defended the outer colonies from pirate fleets, and earned the respect of every military officer in human service. He was 60 years old, with gray hair and scars that told the story of a lifetime spent protecting human settlements. Torres stepped to the podium and looked out at the council members with steel-gray eyes. Members of the council, I accept command of this operation. My orders are simple: total war against the Empire. No quarter asked, none given. We will not stop until every who participated in this atrocity is dead. The chamber erupted in applause, but Torres wasn't finished. However, this will not be a war of conquest or revenge against innocent civilians. This will be justice for murdered children. We will target their military, their government, and those responsible for New Geneva. We will show the galaxy that humanity protects its young with absolute determination. After the council session, met privately with Dr., the director of the secret Titan research facility. Dr. was a small, quiet woman who had spent her career working on humanity's most dangerous scientific projects. Dr., the president said, I'm authorizing Project Thanatos. Doctor's face went pale. Madam President, that weapon, it's never been tested. The destructive potential is beyond anything we've ever built. The killed are children in their beds, replied coldly. They need to understand that there are consequences for such actions that go beyond normal warfare. Yes, ma'am, I'll begin preparation immediately. Across human space, the war machine began to awaken. On Luna, the massive shipyards that had built humanity's exploration fleet started producing warships instead. On Mars, weapons factories that had been closed since the last major conflict roared back to life. In the asteroid belt, mining platforms that normally extracted rare metals for peaceful purposes began forging armor plating and missile components. Corporate executives who usually competed fiercely with each other now worked together, sharing resources and technology for the war effort. But the most powerful weapon being deployed was something uniquely human: memory. The footage from New Geneva was broadcast everywhere. In factories and schools, in bars and offices, on transport ships and mining stations, every human watched the same horrifying images. They saw Sister's final message. They saw the children's shoes scattered in the rubble. They saw the tiny bodies being pulled from the wreckage. And in every human community, the same words were spoken. Remember New Geneva. Remember the children. Captain Sarah, recovering from her injuries at a military hospital, watched the news coverage from her bed. Her ship, the Defiance, had been destroyed, and half her crew was dead. But when Admiral Torres visited her personally to offer her command of a new vessel, she didn't hesitate. "What kind of ship, sir?" she asked. "A new class of dreadnought," Torres replied. 20 times more powerful than anything we've built before. I'm naming it the Sister, and I want you to be its captain. His eyes filled with tears. "It would be an honor, sir." The Sister was one of 50 new dreadnoughts that rolled out of Earth's shipyards in a construction effort that amazed even humanity's own engineers. Working around the clock, human industry produced more warships in 6 months than most species built in decades. The secret was humanity's distributed manufacturing capability. Unlike most alien civilizations that concentrated their industry on a few worlds, humans had spread their manufacturing across hundreds of systems. Asteroid mining operations, orbital factories, planetary industrial complexes, all of it was converted to war production. Advanced computer systems designed for managing interstellar trade networks were to coordinate military logistics. Corporate research labs that had been working on better farming techniques or improved space drives suddenly focused on weapons technology and armor design. Most importantly, humanity's greatest strength was revealed. When their children were threatened, humans could work together like no other species in the galaxy. Doctor's team worked frantically on Project Thanatos at the hidden facility buried deep in Titan's ice. The weapon was based on advanced physics that could destabilize the quantum structure of a star's core. It had been developed as a theoretical doomsday device, but never built because the destructive power was too terrible to imagine. Now, with images of dead children fresh in everyone's mind, the weapon seemed not terrible but necessary. Meanwhile, in space, Ambassador was receiving commendations for his decisive action at New Geneva. The High Council praised him for sending a clear message to the humans about their proper place in the galaxy. The intelligence services reported that humans were building up their military forces, but this was dismissed as typical mammalian overreaction. The reports estimated that humans might be able to field a respectable fleet in a year or two, but nothing that could threaten the mighty empire. They were wrong. 6 months after New Geneva, Admiral Torres stood on the bridge of the flagship UHS Nemesis, watching through the viewports as the largest fleet in human history assembled around him. 500 capital ships stretched as far as the eye could see, accompanied by 2,000 escorts and support vessels. The Nemesis itself was a 20-kilometer-long monster that housed Doctor's ultimate weapon. Its hull was painted white with a blue cross, the same colors as the Stella Maris Orphanage. Below the cross, in simple letters, was written, "For the children." Torres activated the fleet-wide communications system. His message was broadcast to every ship, every crew member, every soldier and officer preparing for the coming battle. "Warriors of humanity," his voice carried across the void, "we go now to seek justice for 623 murdered children. We carry their memory with us into battle. We fight not for conquest or glory, but for the simple principle that those who harm our young must face the consequences." He paused, looking out at the assembled fleet, the largest military force humanity had ever created. They believe they can kill our children and face no punishment. Today, they learn otherwise. Today, they discover why humans guard their young so fiercely. Today, they learn what happens when they awaken our protective instincts. The fleet turned toward space, carrying with it the anger and determination of an entire species. Behind them, on every human world, in every station and settlement, people watched and waited for news of justice. The galaxy was about to learn that there were some lines that should never be crossed, and some prices too terrible to pay. The human fleet arrived at the edge of space like a dark storm cloud blotting out the stars. Admiral Torres stood on the bridge of the UHS Nemesis, watching his sensors display the largest military formation in human history. 500 capital ships formed the core of the fleet, massive dreadnoughts and battleships that had been built in the 6 months since New Geneva. Around them, 2,000 escort vessels created a protective screen that stretched beyond the horizon. Support ships, carriers, and mobile shipyards followed behind, making this not just an attack force but a complete war machine. "Admiral," reported his communications officer, "we're detecting patrol ships at the border. They're sending challenge signals." Tor's expression was cold as space itself. "Send them our response." The message was brief and had been prepared months ago. It was broadcast on every frequency, in every language spoken in space. "This is the human fleet justice. We seek Ambassador and all those responsible for the murder of children at New Geneva. Surrender them immediately or face the consequences." The border patrol consisted of 12 heavy cruisers, ships that would have been considered powerful in most conflicts. Against the human fleet, They looked like fishing boats facing a hurricane. The commander tried to order the humans to withdraw, but his transmission was cut short when human weapons fired. The border patrol was destroyed in less than 30 seconds, their ships torn apart by energy beams that cut through their shields like they weren't even there. Word of the attack spread quickly through space, but their leadership refused to believe the reports. How could the primitive humans have assembled such a massive fleet so quickly? Admiral, commander of the Second Fleet, was ordered to investigate the human raiders and drive them back to their own territory. His force of 80 ships was considered more than adequate for dealing with human pirates or smugglers. When's fleet met the human forces at the Rigel Junction, the battle lasted exactly 17 minutes. The humans had learned from every conflict they had ever fought. Their ships were fast, their weapons were precise, and their tactics were flawless. More importantly, they fought with a cold fury that surprised even veteran warriors. Captain, commanding the Sister, led a squadron of dreadnoughts directly into the center of the formation. Her ship's weapons fired continuously, each shot targeted with computer precision at enemy weak points. "This is for Tommy Martinez," she said quietly as her guns destroyed a battleship. "This is for little Sarah, this is for Sister." Each kill was dedicated to one of the murdered children. The human crews had memorized all their names. The ships tried to retreat, but the humans showed no mercy. Disabled vessels were finished off with precise torpedo strikes. Escape pods were targeted and destroyed. When officers tried to surrender, their transmissions were ignored. Admiral died when his flagship was cut in half by focused energy beams. His last message to High Command was desperate. "They're not raiders. This is a full invasion fleet. Request immediate reinforcement." But by the time his message was received, his entire fleet was already destroyed. Torres ordered his forces to advance deeper into territory. Each system they entered was given the same message: surrender those responsible for New Geneva or face military action. The response was always the same defiance followed by destruction. At the industrial system, 50 ships tried to defend the orbital shipyards where their fleet was constructed. The humans destroyed the defending fleet and then systematically dismantled every military facility in the system. Before each planetary bombardment, the humans broadcast a 48-hour evacuation warning for civilian populations. It was more mercy than had been shown to the children of New Geneva, but it demonstrated that humanity still followed rules of war, even in their anger. The bombardments themselves were precise and devastating. Military bases, government centers, and shipyards were reduced to molten slag. Communications networks were destroyed. Transportation systems were eliminated. The message was clear: support the killers of children and face the consequences. Throughout space, the name Human Fleet Justice became whispered in fear. Stories spread of ships that could destroy entire battle groups, of weapons that could crack planets, of warriors who felt no mercy for those who harmed the innocent. Ambassador, now promoted to Supreme Commander of Defense Forces, watched the reports from his command center on the capital world. The humans were advancing steadily through his empire, destroying everything in their path. "How is this possible?" he demanded of his intelligence chief. 6 months ago, these mammals had barely a dozen warships in their entire fleet. "Sir, it appears we greatly underestimated their industrial capacity," the intelligence officer replied nervously. "They have manufacturing facilities spread across hundreds of systems. When motivated, they can produce warships faster than any species we've encountered." Slammed his fist on the command table. "They're just emotional mammals. How can they coordinate such a massive military operation?" But even as he spoke, was beginning to understand the terrible mistake he had made. The humans weren't fighting for territory or resources. They were fighting for something much more dangerous: justice for their murdered young. In his private communications with the High Council, began using phrases that would become legendary among human intelligence officers. "We didn't attack a military target. We attacked their breeding facility. We have awakened the mammalian protective instinct." They tried to negotiate, offering reparations and the trial of officers involved in New Geneva. But every diplomatic message was returned with the same response: total surrender or total destruction. As the human fleet advanced toward the core worlds, panic began to spread throughout the Empire. Member species started withdrawing their fleets and declaring neutrality. Trade networks collapsed as merchant ships fled human-controlled space. The final confrontation came at the Vega Terminus system, where they had assembled their last hope, the combined Imperial fleet. 12 member species had contributed ships to create the largest force in history. 400 warships from across their empire, representing thousands of years of military tradition and technological development. Admiral Torres studied the enemy formation through his sensors. "They're putting everything into this battle," he observed. "If we break them here, the war is over." Captain's voice came over the fleet communications. "Admiral, the sister requests permission to lead the assault." "Granted, Captain. Show them what happens when they harm our children." The Battle of Vega Terminus began at dawn, ship time. The human fleet spread out in a formation that surrounded the entire force, cutting off any chance of retreat. The humans had learned from every engagement, improving their tactics and coordination with each victory. Their ships moved like a pack of predators, striking weak points and supporting each other with perfect timing. They fought bravely, but they were facing warriors motivated by something stronger than duty or honor. Every human crew member knew they were fighting for 623 murdered children. Every shot fired was an act of justice. The battle raged for 4 hours. When it ended, the combined Imperial fleet was completely destroyed. Not a single vessel escaped. Admiral's flagship was the last to die. As his ship broke apart around him, he managed to send one final message to his: "Tell the Council that we have learned why humans protect their young so fiercely. Tell them that some species should never be provoked." Torres received the report of death with grim satisfaction. The architect of New Geneva was finally dead, but the war was not over yet. "Set course for the system," he ordered. "It's time to finish this." The human fleet turned toward carrying with it Doctor's ultimate weapon and the determination of a species that would accept nothing less than complete justice for their murdered children. Behind them lay the wreckage of the most powerful fleet that had ever assembled. Ahead lay the final reckoning for those who had chosen to wage war against humanity's innocence. The galaxy watched and trembled, finally understanding that there were some lines that should never be crossed, and some species that should never be pushed too far. The human fleet surrounded the system like a ring of iron around the. Admiral Torres stood on the bridge of the UHS Nemesis, looking out at 3 planets, 2 gas giants, and the sun that had given birth to the species responsible for murdering human children. 60 billion lived in this system, along with millions of representatives from every member species of their empire. Ancient cities covered the surface. Orbital stations that had existed for thousands of years drifted in perfect formation around the planets. "Admiral," reported his communications officer, "we're receiving surrender offers from the High Council." Torres had been expecting this. "Put them through." The main screen showed the council chamber of the government. Elderly reptilian leaders, their scales dulled with age and fear, looked out at him with desperate eyes. High Chancellor, the supreme leader of the Empire, spoke first. "Admiral Torres, we surrender completely and unconditionally. We offer full reparations for the New Geneva incident, the execution of all officers involved, and complete submission to human authority in this sector." Other council members spoke quickly, their voices overlapping in panic. We will pay tribute for 1,000 years. Our entire fleet is yours to command. We will serve as human vassals." Tors listened to their desperate offers in silence. When they finished speaking, he activated his own transmission system to address not just the council, but every being in the system. "People of," his voice carried across every frequency, translated into every language spoken in the system. "7 months ago, your military forces destroyed an orphanage on New Geneva colony. They murdered 623 children and 23 caregivers. They filmed this atrocity. They celebrated it." He paused, letting his words sink in throughout the system. "Your leaders have offered surrender, reparations, and submission. But there are some crimes that go beyond punishment. There are some actions that require consequences so severe that they echo through history as a warning to others." The council members on his screen began to understand what was coming. High Chancellor's voice cracked as he spoke. "Admiral, please. Our civilians had nothing to do with New Geneva. There are children here too." Tor's expression remained cold as deep space. "You gave the orphanage 4 hours to evacuate 800 children. You showed no mercy to the innocent. Now you will learn why humans protect their young with such absolute determination." He cut the transmission and turned to Doctor, who had been standing quietly beside the weapon control station. The small scientist looked pale but determined. "Doctor, is Project Thanatos ready?" Doctor nodded slowly. "The device is online, Admiral. Once activated, the star's collapse will create a black hole that will consume everything in the system within 8 hours." Tors looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. These men and women had fought through the entire campaign, destroying fleet after fleet in the name of justice for murdered children. Now they were about to witness the ultimate expression of humanity's protective fury. "Doctor," he said formally, "you are authorized to activate Project Thanatos." The weapon itself was hidden deep in the Nemesis's hull, protected by layers of armor and shielding. It was a small device, no larger than a briefcase, but it contained technology that could manipulate the fundamental forces that kept stars stable. Doctor's hands shook slightly as she entered the activation codes. Around her, the ship's computers began calculating trajectories and quantum field adjustments. The weapon would need to be delivered directly into the star's corona for maximum effect. "Launching delivery system," Doctor reported. "Impact in 37 minutes." Throughout the human fleet, word spread that the final weapon was being deployed. On every ship, crews gathered to watch the sensors and, knowing they were about to witness something unprecedented in galactic history. Captain stood on the bridge of the Sister, watching the small probe carry Doctor's device toward the sun. Around her, the bridge crew worked in respectful silence, understanding the magnitude of what was happening. "Captain," her tactical officer said quietly, "they are evacuating their orbital stations." "Let them try," replied. "There's nowhere to run from what's coming." In the probe bay of the Nemesis, Admiral Tors made one final transmission to the galaxy. This message was broadcast on emergency frequencies that reached every civilized world within 500 light years. "This is Admiral Tors of the Human Fleet Justice, speaking to all species and governments in the galaxy. What you are about to witness is the consequence of harming human children. 7 months ago, the Empire destroyed an orphanage and murdered 623 innocent children in their sanctuary." The transmission included footage from New Geneva images of the destroyed orphanage, the scattered shoes, Sister's body found clutching little Maria's hand. The galaxy watched in horror as the true scope of the atrocity was revealed. "This is the price of harming our young," Tors continued. "Let every species in the galaxy learn from its mistake. Humanity does not forget. Humanity does not forgive. Touch our children and we will erase you from existence." Doctor's probe reached the star's corona and detonated. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the star began to change. The nuclear fusion that had burned for billions of years suddenly reversed. The quantum structure of the star's core became unstable, causing matter to collapse inward at an impossible rate. What had been a normal yellow star began to shrink, its gravity increasing exponentially. On the planets below, scientists detected the changes and realized what was happening. Panic spread across the system as evacuation ships launched desperately from every world and station. But there was nowhere to go. The gravitational collapse would consume everything within 50 astronomical units. High Chancellor made one final transmission as he began to experience massive earthquakes from the changing gravitational field. To any who receive this message, know that the humans possess weapons beyond imagination. Do not provoke them. Do not harm their young. Learn from our fate. The star continued to collapse, becoming denser and denser until it reached the point where not even light could escape its gravity. A new black hole was born in the heart of space, growing larger with every passing minute. The planets were pulled in first, their solid matter stretched and torn apart by tidal forces before disappearing beyond the event horizon. The gas giants followed, their massive forms distorted into spiral streams of matter that fed the growing singularity. Space stations, ships, orbital habitats, everything in the system was drawn inexorably toward the black hole. 60 billion and millions of other beings died within 8 hours, consumed by the artificial catastrophe that humanity had created. Admiral Torres watched through the Nemesis's sensors as the system ceased to exist. Where once there had been worlds and civilizations, now there was only darkness and warped space-time. "Send the withdrawal order to all ships," he commanded. "Our work here is done." The human fleet moved away from the new black hole, their mission complete. Behind them, automated beacons were left to broadcast a simple message in 1,000 languages. Here lies the price of harming humanity's children. They were innocent. They were ours. This is what happens when you harm them. News of the system's destruction spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The Empire collapsed overnight as member species fled in terror, desperate to distance themselves from any association with the killers of human children. Other galactic powers established immediate buffer zones around human space and issued strict orders to their militaries. Human civilians, especially children, are not to be harmed under any circumstances. Any officer who violates this order will be executed immediately. The balance of power in the galaxy shifted fundamentally. Humanity, once considered a minor species confined to a small corner of space, was now recognized as the most dangerous civilization anyone had ever encountered. A year later, a new orphanage was built on New Geneva Colony. The sister memorial home housed 1,400 children and was guarded by an entire fleet of warships. Every human child across the galaxy now knew they were protected by a species that would literally destroy stars to keep them safe. The memorial wall in the orphanage's main hall bore the names of all 623 children who had died, along with the 23 caregivers who had tried to save them. Below the names was a simple inscription: "They were innocent. They were loved. They are remembered." In the ruins of what had once been space, the automated beacons continued their broadcast, serving as a permanent warning to the galaxy. The message was simple but clear. Some lines should never be crossed, and some species should never be provoked. Humanity had learned to reach for the stars in peace. But when their children were threatened, they had shown they could also reach out and extinguish those same stars in terrible, swift justice. The galaxy would never forget the lesson of, and human children would never again face such a threat. The price of that safety was written in the darkness, where an entire star system used to exist, a monument to the fury of a species that would destroy anything to protect its young.